You've played every Mario game. You've conquered every Mario game. You think you've mastered all there is to know about Mario. Well, you better think again. New Super Mario World, made possible by the power of the Super Nintendo Entertainment System. You've never faced the challenge of so many enemies, so many obstacles, so many levels. You've never needed help from a dinosaur before. Super Mario World, you get it only with a Super NES. It's part of the growing lineup of games for the next generation from Nintendo. You've got to play it. You've got to have it. You've got a reputation. Now you're playing with power. Superpower.
Welcome to the Enthusiast Gaming Podcast, where today we're going to be discussing the SNES. Some would call it the greatest system of all time. Some would not. But we got a special guest with us today, Brian from our blog team. He writes about Nintendo, exclusively Nintendo retro stuff, right? That's pretty much what you're covering over there?
That is definitely my focus, yep.
So we had to bring him on for this, right? We're talking SNES. I mean, this is right in his wheelhouse. Brian, thank you so much for joining us today, man.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited. Super Nintendo, not my favorite console of all time, but it definitely ranks up there.
All right. And Wes, we know you were a Sega Genesis boy, but you're here anyway. We love you.
I got some love. I got some love for Super Nintendo too.
Yeah, so do I. I was a Genesis kid also, so this would be an interesting conversation to have. That's what we had to have, Brian. It was a necessity. It was a necessity
to balance things out, right?
Yes. Absolutely. All right, guys. So we're going to be discussing today our early experiences. We're going to talk about some exclusive games, our favorite games, SNES versus Genesis. So we're going to talk about the different versions of games that came out for both systems. We're going to talk about the marketing of SNES versus Genesis, some accessories and add-ons, and we're going to wrap things up with a pulse check, as we always do. If you don't know what a pulse check is, we just talk about 3 retro games, take a look at their prices, and discuss those with you together. Really quick before we get started, guys, I just wanted to shout out our sponsor, Puzzle Shopping. You guys can download the app if you look up Puzzle Shopping on the App Store for iPhones. I think it's on Androids as well. But Puzzle Shopping is basically an app where you can shop, but you get the different perks and stuff. There's discounts they have, and it's also like a social media app. So it's like social media / shopping where you can show off like stuff that you bought. Pretty cool. It's different. It's unique. Wes, you've checked it out a couple times, right?
I have. It's pretty cool. You can definitely get some good deals on there.
So Puzzle Shopping, you can go to puzzleshopping.com or download the app if you look for Puzzle Shopping in the store. Guys, don't forget to follow us over on social media at Nerdthusiast on all things there. Brian also helps us out with all of our social media stuff. So again, thank you, Brian.
I do what I can.
And you guys should be making sure you like, subscribe, all that fun stuff. If you want to support us non-financially, if you just give us a 5-star review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, that really helps us out. And if you like what you hear today and you want to support us financially, patreon.com/nerdthusiast is the best way to do that. You can support us for as little as $1 a month. This month, we're going to give a shout out to Bernardo. Thank you so much for your support, Bernardo. We really appreciate you.
Thanks, Bernardo.
All right, guys, enough of the intro. It's time to get into it. Our early experiences with the SNES. Brian, you're a guest, sir. You get to go first.
Oh, my early experience was fairly early on. I wasn't there for launch day, but I did get it the birthday / Christmas of that same year. My birthday's in December, so my family always had a bad habit of just mushing those all together.
But, man, that's dirty.
It's the burden of being a Christmas kid. I mean, what can I say? But I was lucky enough to be able to get a Super Nintendo fairly close to the beginning of its lifespan. And I still remember to this day, my father installing it on our huge, I think it was like 24-inch TV. Gotta love CRTVs, man. And when we first turned it on, Super Mario World, of course, was the very first game that we played because it was the pack-in title. And my brother and I were just like, wow, look at those graphics. Like it was mind-boggling at the time.
Yeah, Super Mario was very impressive for sure. I think that might have been the first game I also played. I did not have a Super Nintendo growing up. I had a Sega Genesis, as I alluded to earlier, but my neighbor had an SNES, and he would play Genesis games in my house. I would play SNES at his house. Yeah, man, a lot of good stuff. I'll talk more about that in a little while. Wes, what about you, man? What was your first experience with the SNES?
As you kind of told everybody, I was a Genesis kid, so I didn't jump on at launch. it took me a minute. Uh, and what made me decide to go ahead and get a Super Nintendo was when they announced Street Fighter,
Okay.
and I was a big importer, so I wound up buying it with the expectation to order the import to play on it. So, and they had a couple arcade hits, because they had Final Fight, which was a big arcade game at the time.
Yeah, it
So
was.
that was one of my launch titles that I remember playing for the Super Nintendo. So yeah, no, I loved it. Said Street Fighter made me buy it, and I enjoyed it. Wow, it was a great system.
So I have a follow-up question. So you bought it because of Street Fighter. So at that point, there was no intentions of that going to the Sega Genesis. I'm assuming that it was,
Correct.
okay. Which makes sense. They made like 17 versions on the Super Nintendo, so I'm sure.
It was only 3.
Only 3 of the same game. Interesting.
It was the DLC of the time.
It really was. It's like, hey, we updated something. Here's a new cartridge.
Right. Fork over $70.
$70.
Now, Wes, did you get the import? Did you achieve that goal?
I did. Oh, I bought the import. There was a game shop that sold imported games, and I ordered it, and I had to buy an adapter to play on it because the pins were a little different.
Mm-hmm.
But no, I got it, and I played it like crazy.
That's when you were in New York City, right?
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, easier to get imports, if you're in a major city than, if you're in the middle of nowhere. That's going to definitely affect things for sure. If you were in Kansas trying to get an import, I'm sure there's a shop somewhere, but you're going to be hunting that shop down for sure. But now you have the internet, so who cares anymore? It doesn't even matter anymore. It's like a joke.
Well, it's a shame you didn't have the internet back then, because then you would have known that all you had to do is break the little tabs off inside of the Super Nintendo to play the Famicom game.
That was like no such thing. We had to buy the adapter. I bought the little adapter, but having Street Fighter almost a year ahead of time, it was worth it.
That is pretty cool.
Yeah, that's definitely awesome. I mean, everybody played Street Fighter. That had to be like, if it wasn't the biggest game of my childhood, it certainly was one of them for sure. Everybody played Street Fighter. So let's talk about how the console was received when it was released. Brian, go ahead and take this part away, man.
Sure. When the Super Nintendo first came out, I mean, there was such a huge uproar from the parents, because you got to keep in mind that the NES came out right after the big crash in the 80s. So it was essentially like starting from scratch. It was one of the first consoles as far as all of these parents were concerned. And then when Nintendo announces they're coming out with a Super Nintendo, they thought they were getting ripped off. I spent all this money on this console, these controllers, these games, and now you want my kids to buy a brand new set of all this stuff? I'm not spending that kind of money. And so it was highly controversial at the time.
New Super Mario World, created especially for the Super Nintendo Entertainment System.
That's the catch that may take many Nintendo maniacs by surprise. You have to buy a completely new hardware system to play the new Super Mario 4 game.
Why can't you just buy the cassette?
Because it doesn't play in the regular one. You have to buy the Super unit.
Who's doing that?
But the kids won, as they do.
Oh, of course they do. And it's not like there wasn't a precedent. I'm sure we'll get into it more later, but there was already the Sega Genesis out on the market at the time. And so therefore there was 16-bit graphics. So I'm sure with enough kids complaining, hey, Johnny gets to play this game and that game, and they're so much better graphics than what I have on the Nintendo, that eventually it won people over. And the fact that Nintendo did pack-ins at the time, like I discussed earlier with the Super Mario World being packaged in the console, it was a game to play out of the box. It's not like parents had to worry about shelling out extra cash when they first bought it.
Because you remember when Nintendo had Mario 1, 2, and 3, which were huge hits. So when Nintendo showed a better looking Mario with more color, and he's bigger, and graphics were much nicer than what you were used to, it sold systems like crazy.
Oh,
it really did. Had Yoshi. Come on, man.
I mean, yeah, and if people remember, Yoshi was supposed to be in the original Mario Brothers, so the fact that it was Mario coming out in its true form, the way that it was intended, it was a really big deal at the time.
Definitely. So let me ask you guys this question: it not being backwards compatible, did that like turn you off from the system? Were you not interested because of that?
Oh no, I was dead set on getting a Super Nintendo the moment that I saw any ads for it. When I read about it, Nintendo Power, when I saw the commercials, I was ready to get a Super Nintendo.
There's Dad over there.
Ooh, I just love all the new things Kmart has here.
Oh, I can see that.
So that's the new Super Nintendo Entertainment System.
What about it?
They say it has 16-bit technology, whatever that means.
Oh, I see. What else do they say?
That it has 3D graphics and digital stereo sound, and that Super Mario World is included.
Okay, we'll get it for him. So, how long did he work on you?
About 2 weeks.
Older me would kick younger me's butt for even thinking this, but at the time, I would have thrown my Nintendo just in the trash to get a Super Nintendo. Luckily, I didn't have to. My parents didn't make me do that, but oh my goodness, I would have confiscated, I would have forfeited all of my NES stuff if it meant I could get a Super Nintendo. Stupid,
I'm sure a
stupid
lot of
little
people
child.
did. A lot of people did,
Oh.
I'm sure.
Oh, sure. That was a trend, getting rid of your old console to get your new one.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, the backwards compatibility thing, because it hadn't been a precedent yet. Other consoles weren't really doing it. I mean, technically Sega was, but the Master System wasn't big enough here that a converter didn't make much of a difference to people. But yeah,
Atari would have been doing it by then, though, right?
they would have, but again, the crash
Yes.
was almost like hitting a reset button. The fact that we had the crash, everyone looked at the Atari and the Coleco and the television as all that stuff as if it didn't even exist. And it's a shame, they shouldn't have, but I mean, that was just the mindset of our culture at the time.
Another thing we should note during this early period, this was a late start for them compared to the Sega Genesis. I think you know the dates, Brian. What year did the Genesis and the SNES come out?
The Genesis Genesis came out in 1989 in North America,
Okay.
and the Super Nintendo didn't come out until 91.
Yeah, that sounds
so
right.
you're looking at like a 2-year gap between the two. I don't know when NEC brought the Turbo Graphics over, but that was also before the Super Nintendo came out. Because over in Japan, the NEC, the PC Engine, was meant to compete with the NES. So the other consoles did have quite the head start on Nintendo. So the fact that at the end of that quote unquote console war, the Super Nintendo ended up outselling the other consoles is actually pretty impressive considering how late it was to the game.
Yeah, especially Genesis. That's a 2-year head start is a big thing. But as we'll get into later, that first year or two was pretty slow until Sonic came out. That really changed the Genesis.
Yes. Yeah, that having that mascot really made the difference for them. But to your point, when the Super Nintendo came out, Sega Genesis had almost 100 titles out already. Mm-hmm. And here's Nintendo starting off with like 16. Like it was an uphill battle, but I mean they fought.
Yeah, I remember when the Super Nintendo launched. I mean, the launch titles were like slim pickings.
Nintendo has a bad habit of starting off with slim pickings. If you remember, the Nintendo 64 only had the 2.
Oh, I remember. They only had the 2 for like 3 or 4 months. It was like desolate, man. I would go to the video store like every week. Like, is this it? Is this all we're getting? Like, is there nothing else?
Could you imagine the poor kid that got their Nintendo 64 and only had a Pilot Wing 64 to go with it?
That would be so dirty.
That was it.
At least I had Mario 64. I mean, like, I wasn't going to complain with that game. But, man, if someone gave me Pilot Wings in that and nothing else, I'd be so disappointed.
Which is funny because for the Super Nintendo, Pilot Wings was a revolutionary game. The fact that it utilized the Mode 7 that was in the Super Nintendo, that ability for it to scale all the background graphics, it was the first authentic simulator that we really had on a home console. So it was a pretty big deal.
I was going to say at least Sega with their surprise Saturn launch had more titles. At least they had 5.
That is right. That's so horrible.
Yeah, completely not prepared, and they had 5 compared to 2. Wild. Let's actually just segue right into that now. So exclusive games, our favorite games. So we already mentioned Pilot Wings. Do you guys want to say anything else about Pilot Wings?
I didn't play it.
Really?
To this day, have not played it.
It's worth the play just because again the significance that it had at the time. But it was one of those games that I would love to pop in the console, play for a couple of minutes, go ahead and fly the biplane, fly the rocket belt, go ahead and skydive, and then after a couple of rounds of it, I'd be like, okay, I'm good, and just turn it off and move on. It was never a game that I felt like I needed to play through it to completion.
I think I played it for 10 minutes. And I was like, let's play Super Mario World again.
Well, yeah, Super Mario World's gonna hold your attention.
Sure. I mean, there was nothing wrong with the game. I was just like, I'd much rather play Mario World than Pilot Wings, and that's all. I'm not trying to say anything bad about Pilot Wings. It's just time is valuable.
I don't know if it was Nintendo's intention, but I really think Pilot Wings was a way to help sell the console to the adults, to say, "Hey, look at the technology. Look at what your kids can do with this machine." So.
For sure. And another title that would definitely help adults want to purchase it was F-Zero, which was, a super fast game at the time. Like the way it used Mode 7, obviously. It was very much, I guess that would have been before anything like that. Was there another game like that back then? I mean, obviously there's racing games, but was there another one that was close to F-Zero? I know
No.
after F-Zero there's a whole bunch, but was there one before then?
No, the fact that the Mode 7, like you mentioned, gave them the ability to do that scaling in the backgrounds, gave them the perception of speed. So there was no game that had that feeling of fast that went with it like F-Zero did. The only downfall was the game was so complex, the way that the tracks were laid out, that they couldn't find a way to squeeze 2-player on it. They could only do the one. And I don't know if you guys know the backstory to it, not to jump to another title already, but Super Mario Kart actually came from how do we make F-Zero 2-player, and that was create smaller tracks so you could go ahead and have 2 players on the screen.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
I did know that, but I had forgotten about it. I would have totally never remembered that again if you didn't mention it.
I'm full of useless facts.
So am I. It's just the whole remembering part that's hard for me. They're there. They exist. I just need to get a bigger hard drive installed somewhere, so I retain it all.
In the near future, I'm sure that'll happen.
Wes, you got this next one, man.
Oh yeah, this was another title that really made me rush out and buy a Super Nintendo, which was Contra 3, man. Alien Wars. Oh, big Contra fan. And then when I saw that, and because that had the Mode 7, especially when you did the boss fight, because you saw it kind of rotate coming down. Oh, the sound, Contra, all the way. This is probably my favorite Contra.
It's very good.
It's very impressive, yes.
And it's not as hard as the Genesis one, which we're going to get into this in a little while. I probably should talk about this.
Insanely difficult.
Yeah, Hardcore's is insane.
It is. Yeah, but Contra looked great, sounded great.
Mm-hmm.
I can't say anything bad about Contra. I think that was a launch title, wasn't it? Or it was pretty early on if it wasn't a launch title.
It was definitely early. I don't remember.
It was very early.
Okay.
But yeah, the bosses in that game were very impressive. The size and scale of them alone.
Yep.
My favorite was the robots. I think is it the third stage where you have the 2 of them that attack you and they climb on the walls and whatnot. And then finally the guy breaks through the wall and starts shooting flames at you. I mean, just very impressive game.
Yeah, I think those people who made those games were just like watching like all the 80s movies and were just like, oh, look at these 80s action movies. Let's just make one like that, but not license it. make like Rambo or something without using Rambo's license.
Yeah, I mean that's who your heroes were, right? They were modeled after Schwarzenegger and Stallone.
A classic title, Super Castlevania 4 was there. That out of the old Castlevania games, this is probably the best one. I do like 3 a lot. This is probably a better game. I like the directional thing you can do with the whip, all that fun stuff. I'm really torn between this and 3 though. 3 is very good also.
Yeah, Dracula's Curse is a great one, but I love the fact that Super Castlevania 4 is essentially a remake of the first game. They really went back to their roots, and they're like, we're going to give you better gameplay, but we're going to go ahead and give you the same basic story of you working your way through this castle.
Sure.
Yep. It was good. It was good. That was one of the titles that I picked up when I got my Super Nintendo. Because I got like Final Fight, Contra, of course Mario, and then Castlevania.
That's going to sound bad. I shouldn't say that.
What?
Games suck now. They suck.
Would you like to elaborate on that?
Wes just talked about 4 bangers like early on, like legendary games in the beginning of the Super Nintendo. how many legendary games came out in the past 5 years? You can probably count them on one hand. And he just basically, with one hand, talked about the first few months of the Super Nintendo.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry, it's true.
It's
No,
true.
it is. I think nowadays they're more just stuck in a rut. They're just going through the motions, releasing the sequels and the remakes and whatnot that they think are going to go ahead and move items, but they're not focused on actually revolutionizing gameplay anymore. It's just about churning stuff out.
I like new games, but it is so infrequent where I'm like, oh my god, this game is like truly epic. And Wes is like this, all in the SNES for a few months. There you go.
Well, they were all breaking new ground. And in new games' defense, so many things have been done, it's hard to do something new. But
That's
you
a
go
valid
ahead and
point.
you look at the Super Nintendo, Genesis, that generation, what is that, like the fourth generation of consoles, that they were literally breaking new ground because that stuff had never been done before. They had new hardware, new processors, and they were like, let's see if we can pull this off. And so it led to some really amazing gameplay.
True.
That's true. That's very true. Like now it's been there, done that. Okay, it just looks a little bit nicer, but it's the same thing.
Yeah. Every once in a while something surprises me, but it's not often. All right, I'll take this one. Super Mario Kart. This has easily got to be the game I put the most time into. Super Mario World's probably a close second, but my god, this is all I wanted to do once I found out about this game. This is like when I go to my neighbor's house, me and him would hang out. Dude, it was just Super Mario Kart all day long. All day long. It doesn't matter if it's race, battle, loved it all. I loved every single thing in that game.
I think it's funny. I feel the exact same way when it comes to looking back on my childhood and playing it. But if I had to rank the Mario Karts now, it's not making it very high up on that list.
I'll give you that. It was. Go ahead, Wes.
I didn't play Super Mario Kart until I didn't play a Mario Kart until 64.
All right.
I mean, that was the next one.
Right. So
that was the next one. It was possibly the best one. Possibly.
Yeah.
Probably not.
I skipped over it. I was like, eh.
I think that was if we look at the history of Mario Kart, that's probably like my second or third favorite one.
Yeah, 64 is a great game. But of course, none of them would be there if it wasn't for Super Mario Kart. And Matt, I'd have to agree. Like, I didn't care if I was doing the circuits, if I was doing a time trial, racing my own ghost, if I was doing battle, which of course battle is only for multiplayer. There's no reason to even try something battle unless you're playing against an actual human opponent. But that stuff was so fun. That could just occupy hours and hours of your time back then.
You didn't need anything else. I mean, you would want other things, but you wouldn't need anything. I don't even know how many hours to dump into that game. It's incalculable. But everybody knows about Mario Kart. What they don't know about is Final Fantasy 4 and 6. Now, what are you saying, Matt? You're crazy. These are legendary RPGs. I don't like RPGs. So Brian and Wes, take it away.
I don't have a lot of experience with 4. 6 was actually my very first Final Fantasy game. And to be honest, I have a lot of memories of my Super Nintendo as a kid. I don't know where I got this game from. I don't know if I bought it. I don't know if, a friend of mine let me swap one of my games for it. I don't know if I stole the damn thing. I just know that I had a copy of Final Fantasy VI, and you want to talk about a game that I put the most hours into? That was probably it.
Was it 4 or 6?
Game. 6.
6, okay.
6. Yeah, 4 I didn't play until later on in life. I think the Game Boy Advance version is the first time I ever played 4. But, oh my gosh, 6 I absolutely adored. That cast, the storyline, Kefka being one of the most incredible villains ever created for a game. Like, I just adored Final Fantasy VI. I had a strategy guide that after I beat the game, I went through and I literally played that page by page, flipping through it, making sure I didn't miss a single thing during my second playthrough. I loved it.
But keep in mind, when they first came out, they were labeled as 2 and 3.
That is true, because the Americas did not get what we didn't get 2, 3, or 5 here until way later.
That was my next question, because I don't know anything about what the hell happened to 5.
Yeah, when the Super Nintendo released Final Fantasy, they were Final Fantasy 2 and then Final Fantasy 3. But then Years later, after the PlayStation, they went back and kind of put them all back in order.
Sure.
So we got 5, which never actually came out over here.
But why the hell would they skip 5? Like, what?
I think, and I could be wrong, I think it was the fact that localization took so long.
Okay.
That by the time they got done localizing 4, they were like, well, we already got 6. Let's just go ahead and do that one. The Americas won't even notice.
Yep.
So they just figured that they could, pull one over on us and just keep releasing them. I think it's the same reason. Well, we didn't get 2 and 3 because of popularity, because role-playing games were not popular. Matt, you were in the majority. People just did not like them here.
Yep.
But
I play action role-playing games, so everybody knows. I don't play JRPGs. I can't. I don't like. No.
my wife's the exact same way. She can't touch them. They bore the snot out of her.
I won't get into it. I'm just gonna go ahead. Yeah, Final Fantasy. So next up is Yoshi's Island 2. Or I'm sorry, Yoshi's Island. Oh my god. Super Mario World 2, Yoshi's Island. Let me say the whole friggin' title, because they couldn't just call it Super Mario World 2 or just Yoshi's Island. Had to be the whole thing.
That is completely justified for you botching up that title, because let's be honest, the only reason it's called Super Mario World 2 is so it would be the sequel to one of the best-selling Super Nintendo games. Has nothing to do with the sequel, because it's not. It's a prequel.
No, and it's totally different. It's totally different than Super Mario World. It should have just been called Yoshi's Island, and that's it.
Yes. That should have been enough. Yoshi was popular enough. I don't think it needed the tag Super Mario World 2.
Yeah.
Yoshi would have sold titles. But beautiful game. The art style for that game was the idea of doing like that hand drawn almost with a crayon kind of look was inspired. Because when I first saw ads for it, I'm like, that's dumb. Why are they making a game that looks like that? But actually playing it and being immersed in that world, like that's a beautiful thing.
I first played this on the GBA when they re-released it back then, and I was like, "Oh, this game is dope." Never played it back. Well, I didn't have a Super Nintendo back then, but it was a really good game. I don't think. I mean, I know a lot of people really like it. I don't think it's better than Super Mario World. I think it's good. It's different. I don't think it's better than Super Mario World.
I prefer Super Mario World. If I could change one thing about that game, and I bet you guys already know what it is before I say it, and that's the crying Mario.
Oh my god, you want to rip your brain out of your ear.
That
Horrible.
baby whining over and over again. I love video games, but I'm not the best at platformers. I get hit all the time, and every time that thing cries, oh my gosh, it's so obnoxious.
People should understand how sound. I mean, they obviously know how sound affects you, but they should really think about the long-term effects of sounds like that, like bothering people for the rest of their life. I can hear that baby as soon as you talk about it. It's in my head. Horrible.
People are going to think you inputted the sound into this file so they can hear it when it's just playing in their brains right now.
People who make music like that are so creative and innovative, though. Like, here, I'll give you a very quick example. It's a little off topic. I was playing with my daughter the other day. She has a whale. Okay, a whale. She's never seen Jaws, doesn't know what Jaws is, and I was going din 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 din, and like going after her with the whale, and she's like like screaming and stuff. I'm like, genius. The guy who made the music is genius, you know.
I think they probably made that sound so obnoxious to encourage you not to lose Mario.
Sure, you don't want to lose Mario. The same thing with Sonic drowning. That horrible.
That should be a podcast in and of itself. Make a list of like the 10 top most annoying sounds of video games.
Yeah. There's quite a few. That would
Noted.
be definitely a good topic.
Noted for next time.
Let's talk about the Super FX chip. Can you guys discuss the differences between this and Mode 7, which I'm sure is quite a bit, but I'll let you guys take that over.
Polygons, basically. The Super FX chip gave them the ability to actually create 3D graphics on the Super Nintendo before the hardware of the Super Nintendo was able to. So for anyone that doesn't know, it's literally a chip that's on the cartridge itself. It's not in the console. So that's how we were able to get Star Fox when we did. I mean, and I don't know anyone who doesn't like Star Fox, at least as a series. One of the entries, the entire thing, the original, of course, 64 is the most popular. But if we did not have Star Fox on the Super Nintendo, I think that would have been a huge loss to gaming, because that game was just Oh, just freaking beautiful.
It was like a new way to play like old shoot 'em ups. Like it was
Mhm.
awesome, incredible, and to see that on the Super Nintendo when you first saw it, it was like, what? How is this
Yeah.
possible on a
Oh,
Super Nintendo?
we thought it was amazing. You go back and play it now, it looks incredibly dated because it is just really rough polygons on a screen.
Mhm.
But at the time, it was literally unheard of. The only time that you ever had something that was truly polygonal and 3D back in that era was when you were just looking at frames. It would just be a wireframe. You could see right through it. This was able to add texture and just really make something visually three-dimensional. And that was a huge feat back in the 90s.
Well, Sega did have virtual racing, which was all polygons.
Yes, it did.
They did. That's right.
So they did throw that out there. So they were kind of competing for the same technology.
Were they first or second? Who went first there? Does anybody know?
I don't, to be honest.
I don't, because you figure Virtual Fighter and Virtual Racing were arcade titles. So
But when Virtual Fighter came over to the Genesis, they just turned it into a 2D fighter.
we don't even talk about that.
Did I bring up Bruno? Should I not have said that?
It was fine on the Saturn, but it should never have been on the Genesis.
Agreed 100%.
But Virtual Racing did come out for the Genesis.
Yeah. So I wonder if it
have
beat
it.
Star Fox to the market. I'm curious now.
I want to say Star Fox, I think, for the home console, beat Virtual Racing to the market.
And then they made a game that didn't come out until sometime around 2015, I would say. I don't remember years all blend together at this point, but no, maybe it was later. I don't know. The SNES got re-released in the mini format from Nintendo, where an official release of Star Fox 2 happened for the first time ever. And the game was almost complete. Nintendo, I guess, finished it and released it to the public. What are you guys' thoughts on Star Fox 2?
I think it's great that we got it. I'd be perfectly fine if we hadn't, only because I don't think it does anything better than Star Fox does. I think Star Fox is the better game, but it's so amazing that something that was done for marketing decisions only. They finished it. They realized, we're moving on to the Nintendo 64. We don't need to release this title on the Super Nintendo right now. But the fact that we still got to see it, the fact that there is a reason to own a mini if you're a game collector, because you already own all the games that are emulated on there, to actually be able to have a copy of Star Fox 2, I think that's pretty cool. But the game itself, nothing all that special.
No, I mean, we already had Star Fox, and like you said, they were moving on to the 64, which we got Star Fox on anyway.
Yes.
Which is great.
Arguably the best version of Star Fox is Star Fox 64.
So.
Oh, it's not arguable. It is.
Argument one.
Now, this is another title I haven't played, so I'm going to leave this one up to you guys too. Stunt Race FX. I don't know a single thing about this game.
You're not missing too much. You guys aren't missing too much. It was, again, I kind of put it in the same vein as Star Fox 2, is that it's great that we got it because it gave us a 3D racing game. But to be honest, the Super Nintendo really couldn't handle the processing power needed for it. And so it was always a sluggish game, so it wasn't really all that worth it. So as far as the FX chip goes, that one didn't really give us anything all that powerful. The next title, however, when it comes to the FX chip, was totally worth it.
And that title is Doom, which is an epic game.
And the Super Nintendo version was a pretty darn good release. I mean, Doom came out for everything. I mean, you could play Doom on a home pregnancy test now, but Doom on the Super Nintendo was and still is an impressive game. And if it wasn't for the FX chip, we wouldn't be able to do that because it utilized both the Mode 7 and the FX chip simultaneously to give us those 3D environments. And so that was a great first foray into the first-person shooter for a Nintendo console.
And it had the red SNES cart. I know that for sure.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. Yeah, got that sucker sitting on my shelf over there.
I got to get that version of Doom. That's like one of the few versions I don't have.
I could see people being just a Doom collector. You could literally have a whole subset of just Doom.
Just Doom across multiple consoles.
Oh, yeah. Different versions.
Now, the next game may be the greatest game of all time. just because of what it packs. Super Mario All-Stars, Super Mario 1, 2, and 3. Now, if you get the version that has World, it's probably the greatest cartridge that ever existed. 1, 2, 3, and World, come on. What more could you want in one cartridge?
Oh, that was a stellar release, and for a lot of people, the very first exposure they had to the first 3 Mario games.
I like the graphic style that they chose for it too. It's different, obviously, than the SNES, or I'm sorry, than the NES version, but I think it looks better overall. The gameplay was pretty much the same, though. I mean, it might have been tweaked a little bit, but it was relatively similar. It just looked better.
Yeah, it was fantastic. The best comparison that I could think of is the Ninja Gaiden trilogy. They went ahead and did a Ninja Gaiden trilogy on the Super Nintendo, and it controls horribly. It is so bad. You are so much better off. Oh yeah, you are so much better off going back and playing the old NES version than the Ninja Gaiden trilogy on the Super Nintendo.
That game is uncommon. That game is harder to find, the Super Nintendo trilogy.
Oh, because I think everybody trashed it because it wasn't worth holding on to. But All Stars, I mean, they did such a great job maintaining the quality of the platforming in those games. And Matt, like you said, the upgrade to the graphics, it's very impressive. Very well done.
Have you played those versions before, Wes?
For a hot minute.
Okay.
For a hot minute, I was never a big Mario person. So it's like I played it for a minute and then it was kind of went back to Sega or something else.
That's not a surprise.
Not to keep pitching ideas, but in another episode, Wes, I think you need to make your top 5 Mario games. Since you're not a big Mario person, I would love to see how you would rank, like just your top 5 favorites.
Like as great as Super Mario 64 was, I think I played it. I got 2 stars and I never touched it again.
What?
That's practically blasphemous, man.
Wes.
And it was fantastic, but I just I know.
That I mean.
Anyway, our next game.
No.
You can't move on.
Look, Wes, out of all the games I could ever recommend you, that is the one game you need to play. Like, that is my favorite Mario game by far. Like, by far. Like, people talk about Odyssey being so amazing, and it was good. It was not Mario 64. It was not Mario 64. Wes, you gotta play my God, you gotta play Mario 64, Wes. Anyway, Super Metroid is cool. I like that quite a bit also.
Super Metroid is awesome.
It is.
Metroid is my favorite Metroid entry.
My choice was this t-shirt or my Super Metroid t-shirt. I went with this one just to stay true to, me. And that this was the game I played the most on the SNES, but Super Metroid's so badass, man. What a great game.
That was great. Yeah, it was really, really good.
It's truly the birth of the Metroidvania as a genre.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, don't get me wrong, the original 2 Metroid games still had the exploration, still had the backtracking, but it was Super Metroid that really perfected that, making the different areas look different, feel different. The power-ups were amazing. The bosses were great.
You kind of figure out where you're going and not want to kill yourself. That part was great too. Having a
there
map,
was a map when you hit the boss spot, right? I have almost no notes for Super Metroid. Just an incredible game all around.
Yeah. I remember playing the first Metroid, just being constantly lost and annoyed all the time. I know there was like at the time I didn't know because I was a stupid little kid, but there was a Nintendo Power that had like, a map printed out or something on it where you could like actually figure out where the hell you're going. That would have been helpful if they, I don't know, put that in the box or put it on the screen.
I had a Nintendo Player's Guide when I was a kid. When I first got my NES, it came with the Nintendo Player's Guide, which is a big black strategy guidebook, had tons of maps, all different games. My parents found out that there was the action set that came with the light gun and with the power pad, and they made me return my Nintendo that had that guide in it. And I bawled like a little baby because I lost that book because it had the map for Metroid in it, and I could never figure out where I was going without it.
Oh, man.
That's a horrible thing to lose. My God.
I was devastated. But I got Duck Hunt and a Zapper, so I mean, I can't really complain.
Yeah, Duck Hunt's awesome, too. Link to the Past. Many would say the best Zelda game of all time. Not me, but many.
I am one of those people. Link to the Past is my favorite Zelda game. Don't get me
I can
wrong.
see it.
I understand the arguments for so many others, and I can't necessarily say that my opinion is the correct opinion. But that game was just it's just so immersive. The light and dark world, the backstory of Ganon. It was
The graphics were beautiful.
oh
You know,
yes.
music was spectacular.
My note, my critique. Why does Link have pink hair?
Rock and roll, man. This is the 90s.
Of all the versions of Link, for some reason the Super Nintendo one has pink hair. It's just so weird.
I don't know. Could have been that CRT, you know.
Well, that's supposedly the color it's supposed to be. But I mean, no judgment. I just think it's weird.
I think that it's a great game. And to be fair, I never finished the game. Played it multiple times, many times. I'd never finished the game. Probably a black eye for me, but I bet you if I went back and I played it, it's still I know it wouldn't be my favorite because I've already played it. It would probably be my second favorite or third favorite, somewhere around there. You know, excellent Zelda title. Can't go wrong.
I'm with you. I didn't finish it either, but I did play it.
Yeah, it was awesome. And here's what I'm going to give Nintendo. I'm tired. Just going to go quick rant real fast. All these people coming out of the woodwork. Zelda 2 was such a great game. There's a reason they made it different on the Super Nintendo. There's a reason. No one liked Zelda 2. Get over it. It wasn't a great game. It was whatever. It was not Zelda 1.
Back to the original formula.
Right. There's a reason they changed it. So you can keep thinking Zelda 2 is great. You're wrong. It's okay. I'm just trying to get people to come after me today. That's all.
You might succeed.
Oh no, this is a sweet ass game. We talked about the graphical change with Star Fox, how it was polygonal, how they used the Super FX chip. I mean, whatever the hell Rare was doing over there with Donkey Kong Country, my God, I'd never seen anything look like that before.
Never.
It breathed new life into the console. Because I honestly feel like the Super Nintendo would have went completely downhill at this point because all the new systems were on the horizon, and then Rare does this beautiful scan of 3D images and finds a way to animate it. And really, especially on a CRTV, because if you play it nowadays on a flat screen, on an LED, it does not look the same. But if you play Donkey Kong Country the way it was originally intended to be played, there was nothing that looked that good. It was stellar. People were blown away that something like that was on the Super Nintendo.
Yep. I remember powering it up for the first time and I was like, oh my goodness, what are we playing? It looked, well, for CG, it looked almost CG. You know, just the technique that they used to create the graphics and Donkey Kong was just such a good game. Such a good game.
Oh yeah, all the secrets that were in it too. Like it wasn't just a graphical powerhouse. The game had personality. Donkey Kong and Diddy Kong, the way they reacted to things when they got hit, when they stood there and waited too long, when they tag teamed each other to swap players, all of it was just so vivid. You felt like you were really living in that jungle. It was so.
And the music brought it all together. The music was spectacular. Yep. I mean, that first Donkey Kong Country soundtrack is like a 10 out of 10, easily.
Oh, definitely. The underwater world, probably one of the only times in my life I was okay with playing an underwater stage because that music was so beautiful. I didn't care that I was having to swim.
Yeah, when Nintendo released their music app, if you have the Switch Online, I think that was the first thing I put on was the Donkey Kong Country soundtrack. Or maybe I didn't. It may not have been in there originally because I didn't download it for like a few weeks like after it released. But when I went in there, I was like, "Oh, Donkey Kong Country! All right, let's play this."
Yeah, that was great all around. Soundtrack, gameplay, graphics, so impressive.
And then there's the 3 Kirby games, 2 Kirby games. I know there's at least 2.
The way they did Kirby on the Super Nintendo was so weird because there's the Superstar Collection.
Yes,
so you got a ton of Kirby stuff on one. And then you have the spin-offs because you got the Dream Course, so now you can play golf with Kirby. And then you have the puzzle attack, and Kirby was there in every which way or form you could possibly imagine. So Kirby really represented when it came to the Super Nintendo. None of his games were, chart busters or anything. They didn't sell incredibly well, but they all held their own, and they brought that little bit of charm that Nintendo is known for.
Yeah, I didn't get into Kirby till later, which I do like Kirby quite a bit now, but back then it was all about Mario. What about you,
Kirby was geared towards a younger audience, so
for sure. I would have been like, I don't know, 10, 11, 12, somewhere around. I didn't care at that point.
Never played a Kirby game.
Not a surprise. If you didn't play a friggin' Mario game, you never played a Kirby game. You know how mad I would be right now if he was like, "Oh, I played like every Kirby game. You didn't play Mario 64?" Oh my, Wes, I would fly to New Jersey and punch in the face.
Wes, if you came out and said you 100%ed Forgotten Lands, I just would have lost it, man.
To this day, I've never ever played a Kirby game.
They're fun little games. You're not missing a lot, Wes.
I know.
Well, and again, it's because it's geared towards younger kids. They were really looking at the early elementary school crowd with those Kirby games to give them a chance to be able to play without dying every 3 seconds.
Then we have a unique game, which I'm sure there's a bunch of different games that try to rip this off, but this was the OG ActRaiser that mixed strategy and I guess you'd call it like an action platformer.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, ActRaiser was a different beast. ActRaiser was one of my brother's favorite games for the console. And while the action sections are fun, for some reason when they made the sequel, that's all they focused on. They got rid of the simulation part and just went straight to the action. But it was always the simulation, the strategy type side that my brother just absolutely adored. You beat the first level, you go down to the planet, and you help these people develop their town. You help them find resources. You help them fight off little, demonic creatures like bats and little demons that are shooting lightning at their town and whatnot. It's almost like a version of Sim City. It's a really unique game. You've never really seen it replicated the same way that ActRaiser pulled it off.
Was your brother older than you?
Younger. He was about 3 years younger than me.
Okay, that's surprising. You would think that would be like the city building sections would be more geared towards older people than.
Oh yeah. And I'm sure that was their target audience. My brother was always quirky that way. He was like the more obscure type titles, so it didn't surprise me any that he was gravitating towards that section of ActRaiser.
What about you, Wes? You got familiarity with this one?
ActRaiser? Nope. I saw strategy and I stayed away from it.
I'm sure you both played this. Wes, I know you have. So Wes, why don't you kick this one off, man?
Chrono Trigger. Fantastic game. And the reason I picked it up is because the art director, Akira Toriyama, who's well known for Dragon Ball, because I was into Dragon Ball back then, and I knew his art style, and I saw it and had to buy it. Knew it was an RPG, didn't care. I saw his art, I had to buy it. And it turned out it was really good.
Yeah, some people call this the best, would say it's the best RPG on the SNES.
I prefer that over the Final Fantasy.
You do?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. What about you, Brian? What do you think?
I can't put it above Final Fantasy VI, but it definitely I definitely understand anyone's argument for putting it at their top Super Nintendo role-playing game. The art style, as you mentioned, Wes, absolutely beautiful. And the story. The way that they integrate the time travel throughout the gameplay, it's really well done, and it keeps you engaged the entire time. Like you'd think with a JRPG, there'd be areas that lag, that you just feel like, all right, can we move this along? Can we get the pace going here? Chrono Trigger doesn't have any of that. It's constantly moving. There's constantly stuff going on. It's everything people say it is.
It is. It really is. And it's a little pricey now to try to find it. If you're looking for a complete in box, it's crazy expensive.
It is. I saw one on Facebook Marketplace the other day. I was like, what the hell? I was like, what? And then I looked it up. I was like, oh, no, that's what it's going for. That's insane.
My recommendation, if someone wants to play the game, look for the DS version.
Oh,
it's cheaper. Still not cheap, but it's cheaper. And it's a great experience. I really enjoyed playing it on the DS.
Was that a solo release in the DS, or was it in like a compilation with other stuff?
It was solo.
Okay.
Yeah, they literally re-released the game. They tweaked some things, integrated the touchscreen for your menus and whatnot. It's a great release of the product. It really is good. It does Chrono Trigger justice.
Cool. If you want it, pick it up now. All those DS games are going up in price, man. All of them. Especially if it's an RPG, it's going up in price. On like you needed to buy it yesterday, but even if you buy it today, it's just going to be worth more in the next few years. So if you want an RPG in the DS, go pick it up. I'm not in Wes. Go. This is your game, sir, not mine.
Oh man, yeah. Okay. You can't talk about Super Nintendo unless you talk about Killer Instinct.
The black cartridge.
The black cartridge with the soundtrack.
Oh yeah, that's right.
It came with the CD soundtrack of the game, and everybody knows I love my fighters. So yeah, Killer Instinct. Played it in the arcade. Super excited when I heard it was coming out for Super Nintendo. Yeah, as far as comparison, graphically, it suffers. It suffers, but it sounds really good. It plays well. It doesn't look like the arcade or the 64 version, but still, it's Killer Instinct.
Well, the 64 version was very expensive when it came out. I clearly remember that being like $100 game or something. Was the SNES version that came with that soundtrack like also $100?
I want to say I want to say it was like $69.99.
Really?
Back in the day, it was pretty pricey.
That's that's pretty good. I think that most of the SNES games were probably around $60 or $70 at that point. So I'm surprised that it came with a soundtrack that it wasn't more.
Mm-hmm. No, I think it was like $69.99 because I think Super Nintendo games on average were about $49.99, $39.99.
Were they really? They were that cheap?
It really depends when you're picking it up and what type of game it was. That was always the drawback to cartridges, that if it used, more memory or if they had to add extra chips, they pass that fee on to the consumer. Yeah. So a lot of your JRPGs were like $80-$90 a pop. But yeah, if you could get that Killer Instinct, such a great game with a soundtrack and it was only running like $60-$70, I'd say that's a good deal.
Yeah, I mean, Killer Instinct Gold or whatever it was on N64, that game was either $90 or $100. Like, and it just came, as far as I know, it just came with the cartridge in the box. But for whatever reason, that was like one of the most expensive N64 games that was released.
That was it. You just got the game.
Well, it was essentially a straight port of the arcade, wasn't it?
The 64
Killer Instinct
version?
Gold. It was pretty much I know it wasn't exactly a port, but the game itself was just like the arcade version, or at least my memory says that.
I don't remember. I did play it, but I don't remember. It's been ages.
Yeah, it wasn't an exact port because they had Killer Instinct 2 in the arcade. So I think Gold incorporated, parts of 1 and 2 together, if my memory serves me correctly. It strayed more closer to 2.
Okay. That's cool. That's a smart thing to do, though. Take like the best of 1 and 2, mix them together. Here you go.
Right.
Makes sense to me. Mega Man X series. A fine Mega Man series.
It is indeed.
Someone's gonna come after me so bad.
It was good. X was good.
I enjoyed X. I love the fact that if you played X and you played the stages in a different order, it literally impacted how the game was played. So if you play the original Mega Man X and you defeat the ice stage first, when you go to play the fire elephant stage, the fire in the game is actually toned down. Most of the areas where the fire's blasting up through the gaps and whatnot, it's not there because of the fact that you defeated Chill Penguin beforehand. Like, they literally changed the way that the game works.
I didn't know that.
I love the fact that it was that in depth. It was
cool.
a unique twist on the whole choose your own adventure kind of game that Mega Man's always been.
Yeah, I never realized that. That's awesome.
I didn't know that at all. I just enjoyed the games.
Yeah, the first 6. The X series is fine.
X is fine.
I just prefer the OG ones. That's all.
I get that, but it was a step up in graphics. I would love to say a step up in sound, but I'll have to kind of agree with you on that one, Matt. The original NES games, the soundtracks were amazing on those.
Yeah.
So, but
I just like the art style and everything. Like the Mega Man X series, we just got like 2 anime and stuff. I was like, dude, what happened? What happened, man? Where's my little Mega Man guy at?
You didn't like being able to do reuse Fireball in a X-Men game?
I don't know.
It was
I just have-
Capcom cross-promoting.
At least they weren't like Mega Man X 1.5, Mega Man X 1.7 trying to re-release the same damn thing like 15 times that they do with Street Fighter.
Yeah, I'll give you that.
Yeah. I mean,
I'll give-
going off on a tangent, did anybody watch Secret Level
No.
on Amazon? It's an anthology series based on video games, and each episode is like 15 minutes.
I know what you're talking about, but I've never seen it.
Awesome series. But there's a Mega Man one in there because you talked about the OG. There's a Mega Man one in there that's really good.
And they use the OG?
They use the OG.
That's right. See, because they know it's better. If X
funny.
was better, they would have used X. I'm sorry. Just speaking the truth.
I think it's funny that they've made so many Mega Man games, and yet the Mega Man games really don't sell all that well.
But
People
they're
don't
awesome.
people don't buy a ton of Mega Man games when they come out. It's actually a very niche audience for those games. But
I think
I'm
bought
one of
all
the ones
those
that buys them.
collections that
I
they
love them.
re-released.
Right? Well,
I
I
think
think
I
they
have
just see it
every
as a way
one.
to cash. They go ahead and they do the collection, and those that love it, those that are the diehard fans, like maybe some of us in this chat right now, would go ahead and buy the collection, and so they know they got our money.
Or they turn around and give us Mighty Number 9.
Well, that wasn't them. That was
No.
Inafune went over there and he
tried to recreate it. But
he tried.
If you guys don't want to talk about Virtua Fire on the Genesis, I don't want to talk about Mighty Number 9.
All
So.
right, yeah. Fair enough. Secret of Mana. Mana. I've heard it say so many different ways. It's M-N-A. M-A-N-A. Sorry, I can't even read. M-A-N-A. Mana or Mana? What do we
I say
got, Brian?
Mana. I don't know if it's right. I've always said Mana.
I've always said Mana.
We got two Manas. Okay. I'll leave it. I have no idea. Don't know anything about this one. Go ahead, guys.
Action RPG. So the parts of RPGs that you don't like are gone in this
Really?
one.
I was not even aware of that.
Yeah, the entire Mana series. Well, I shouldn't say that. Mana series does change from title to title slightly, but the Secret of Mana series basically is this giant sprawling adventure that plays out the same way that a role-playing game would, where you're playing as these specific characters, where you're trying to go ahead and unfold this long and depth story, but the action is like a Zelda game. It's got a little bit of hack and slash going on there.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
And you could actually play it with up to 3 players.
I mean, that's even cooler. That's fantastic.
If you want to buy a tap.
No, not doing that. Did you play this one, Wes?
A little bit. It's good. But it's one of those time-consuming games, and at the time there was a bunch of stuff coming out, so I didn't really complete it. I think I played so many hours and then kind of got diverted and played something else.
Like Super Punch-Out? Did you play that?
That I did.
Tell me about Super Punch-Out, Wes.
I did. Everybody was coming off the hype of Mike Tyson's Punch-Out, and so it already had a name for itself. So Punch-Out is just fun. It's just a fun boxing game.
But no Little Mac.
No Little Mac.
I was going to ask whether or not we were calling him Little Mac, but yeah, he's pretty much a different character in this game.
Yeah, well,
they went to the arcade roots. In the arcade, it was the see-through stencil of a guy, where you're basically using the grid system, like we were talking before with games before Star Fox.
You know who my favorite boxer is, Wes? See-through stencil guy. That's my favorite boxer ever. Why don't you have a character? I know you see through him. Who cares? Pull the camera out after the match, show you Little Mac. That's what everybody wants. Or maybe your bigger version. Call him Big Mac. Get sued by McDonald's. How about that? Or have a partnership. He can be pounding Big Macs in between his fights.
Big Mac is what he becomes in a Smash Brothers when he hits the Smash Ball.
But yes, Punch-Out's great. I mean, if you play Punch-Out, it's Punch-Out. It's fantastic. Looks pretty. That's Punch-Out. Final Fight. We're talking about the first one here, correct, Wes?
Correct.
Now, what's the difference between the three of them? There's three on the SNES, right? Is there any major differences between the three of them?
Yes, the characters. Well, first of all, this was a single player. Final Fight in the arcade was a 2-player game. When it came out for the Super Nintendo, they took out the 2-player mode.
That sounds like a mistake.
It's a single player, but you could play as the 3 characters: Guy, Cody, and Hagar.
And this isn't a head-to-head fighting game. This is like a
side scrolling beat 'em up.
Okay.
Could you play as Guy in the original release? I thought that was the Blockbuster rental exclusive.
Correct. Right. You were correct.
So Blockbuster had an exclusive character?
Yes, there was another, because there were 3 characters: Guy, Cody, and Hagar. But yeah, for the Super Nintendo one, you could not play as Guy. They had a Final Fight Guy version, like he said, for Blockbuster.
How hard is that to find?
It's pretty tricky.
Yeah.
And it goes for a pretty penny.
Yeah, I bet it does. Stupid Blockbuster. Still holding and wielding their power to this day.
And then Final Fight 2 and 3, same style of gameplay. They altered the characters, added some new characters. Final Fight 3 is actually pretty pricey, if you can find it.
We should do a segment on the Blockbuster exclusive stuff. There was that 64 Sculptor's Cut. There's probably been a bunch of them. We could talk about how ridiculous some of that stuff is to find. There was also versions of tournament stuff that they did with Nintendo. Like, I think there's a Donkey Kong Country or something like that tournament version that was only available in Blockbuster that's super hard to find. That would be cool to do. We should do that one day.
That Sculptor's Cut is the only repro cart that I have in my collection because I refuse to pay $1,000 for a cart-only version of a bad fighting game.
It's called Sculptor's Cut 63 1/3. Isn't there something else to it, right?
It's Clay Fighter 63 1/3, and then Clay Fighter Sculptor's Cut.
Got it.
Sculptor's Cut is the Blockbuster exclusive version.
Got it. Yeah, those. I don't know that anybody even has them because I check the price on those every once in a while, and the ones that come with complete in box, I haven't seen the price move in forever. So either they're so hard to find, or like nobody has them that like they just never sell because the price is just always the same.
Well, that's the catch with the rental copies, because most of the boxes got thrown away, so there's hardly any of them out there. Card only is probably the only way most people are going to get their hands on it.
For sure. We're going to go back to where we started. Street Fighter 2 Turbo. We're going to talk about the Turbo version, which was the version that had... Go ahead, Wes.
It had the option to turn the speed up.
Cool. And didn't it have different characters, or was it the same?
Same characters, but you could play as the boss characters.
You could play as the boss character. Okay. Got it. So it was, what, M. Bison and...
Vega.
Okay, Vega.
Scott. Yep.
And Balrog.
Okay.
Yeah, because that was the one complaint. Everybody, as great as Street Fighter, the original one was, everybody said it played slow. So then they came out with Turbo, which allowed you to speed up the actions, so to speak.
Genesis could have used that version, that's for sure.
Well, Genesis got the Champion Edition, which lets you play as the bosses.
Slow as hell. That thing was like 5 frames, man. I remember that. I still loved it because it was all we had.
It's all we had.
Rough. So rough.
But it was not the better version, that's for damn sure. Man. Yeah, so if you get Street Fighter, you definitely want to get the Turbo version. Absolutely.
Yes.
Super Street Fighter 2 isn't too shabby on the Super Nintendo.
No, it's not.
That's the one that adds the extra 4 characters.
Correct. But the brand new characters, DJ, was it T-Hawk and
Cammy?
Yeah.
Somebody else.
Fei Long?
Yes.
There you go, Wes. Pulling that one out. No way I would have remembered that.
Me neither.
All right, guys. So this next section is all about SNES and Genesis versions. There was, games with the same title but a different version on these consoles. And I'd be remiss if we did not start out with Aladdin. And I've watched videos just to make sure I wasn't crazy. The Genesis version is superior in every way, shape, and form. Graphically, visually, sound quality, this is 1,000 times better than the SNES version, in my opinion. It's the right opinion. If you have ears and eyes.
I have to ask 2 questions when it comes to the Genesis version.
Sure.
One, how often did Aladdin wield a sword in
What
the
do you
Aladdin
mean?
movie?
How
In the Aladdin movie, how often did Aladdin wield a
Sure.
sword?
Not
He was all
often.
about his acrobatics, and that's what the Super Nintendo focuses on. And 2, why do all the guys turn into clouds of dust when you hit them with the sword?
It was the Magic Genie sound. And nowhere to go.
There you go.
No, I cannot argue that the Genesis version is excellent. They literally had Disney animators help them with the game. And so it looks like the cartoon.
It really does.
It is just beautifully done. I personally prefer the acrobatic feel of the Super Nintendo version, but there is no arguing how friggin' beautiful the Genesis one is.
Yeah, because the Super Nintendo one was made by Capcom.
Correct. They did a lot of Disney stuff back in the day.
They did. So even though they were both a side-scroller platformer game, no, Genesis one, hands down.
Yeah, I think it was like Virgin Media or something made the Sega Genesis version, and it was, I don't know. I don't know how much I played the SNES version. It's just because I remember playing it. It was just like, oh my god, this is not as good as the Genesis version. I went back, and to your point about the swords, their video games are supposed to be fun.
Yes.
I'd much rather
Yes,
wield a sword around.
Fun could have been the answer to either of those 2 questions. This is more fun that way.
The SNES is a fine version. If that's what you had, I'm sure I would have really enjoyed it if I had an SNES. I do think the Genesis version is better in the circumstance. Just like I relinquished, earlier when we were talking about Contra, like I think that the SNES version is better than Contra. Very different than Hardcore, but I absolutely think Contra 3 Alien Wars is better than Contra Hardcore.
That I agree with too.
Fair enough. If considering that fact, then yes, I can concede that the Aladdin version on Genesis is a lot more fun.
Okay. All right. We're getting somewhere, ladies and gentlemen. Yeah, so that's awesome. We got 2 Batman games on here. First of all is the Adventures of Batman and Robin, and then we have Batman Returns, and I did not play any of these, so I'm going to leave it up to you gentlemen to discuss.
So Batman, the Adventures of Batman and Robin. I think we talked about them before in one of our videos. Same title, completely different games. Complete art style, different art style, different mechanics. The Super Nintendo one was made by Konami, and it felt more like the animated series, whereas the Genesis one was made by another company, and it was insanely hard.
To our point with Aladdin, saying that with the Disney animators making the Genesis version look more like the cartoon, the Konami version on the Super Nintendo for the Batman animated series looked way more like the cartoon.
It did.
And therefore just gave it a better authenticity. The Genesis version is not bad, but the Super Nintendo one, it's like playing an episode of the show.
Yep. And the same thing goes for Batman Returns. Same title, totally different gameplay. Whereas I have to give it to the Super Nintendo one, which was a side-scrolling beat 'em up. And the Genesis one was, I don't know. Sega kind of dropped the ball on that one.
The Genesis one was kind of all over the place. They tried to add a lot of platforming elements to it that just didn't quite work. The Super Nintendo one had the bigger sprites. It had the black costume like in the movies.
They did. Yep.
Because the Genesis one looked a little more purplish.
It was like purple. Yeah, it had purple colors to it. And
yeah.
I'm going to give you my 2 cents. Completely unbiased. I've watched a comparison video of those 2 versions. The Genesis one looks like hot garbage, and the SNES one looks spectacular.
Okay. We were sugarcoating it, but yes.
I didn't play either game. I just watched a comparison video, and my God, I would have been so disappointed with that Genesis version. Why is he wearing purple? I know they did that in the NES, but I know they had to. They didn't have to do that in the Genesis version.
No. Maybe that's what they were trying to do, is monopolize on that NES Batman crowd.
I don't know. And recently I found out that there's a developer that's converting Batman Returns Super Nintendo to the Genesis.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, there you have that. That pretty much sums up how good that version is for the Genesis.
Yep.
Next up, we got TMNT Tournament Fighter, and then we're going to talk about, of course, Turtles in Time and Hyperstone Heist. But let's start out with Tournament Fighter. These are two pretty different games between the Genesis and the Super Nintendo.
The Super Nintendo one controls a heck of a lot better than the Genesis one does. The Genesis one feels very
sluggish.
Yes, thank you, Wes.
Sluggish.
I agree, but I will say one thing: the Genesis version looks better. I do think the graphics look better in the Genesis version, in my opinion.
I prefer the art style with the Genesis version as well.
But the controls, yeah, you're right.
Mm-hmm.
And for a fighter, controls are everything.
Correct.
Well, look, we all agreed on one. How about that? There's no fighting whatsoever. No trying to convince anybody on anything. TMNT Turtles in Time and Hyperstone Heist, great classic games. Turtles in Time is based off the arcade game. Hyperstone Heist is a version of that is different, geared towards the Genesis. And you guys can give your opinions. I think it's probably a draw. I think this is going to be tough to pick one or the other.
I think someone's going to have a great time regardless of which one they play.
Mm-hmm.
Correct.
I prefer Turtles in Time.
I think I do too.
I think the Super Nintendo has much more vivid colors when it comes to the Turtles palettes and whatnot, making each one look a little bit different than each other. I enjoy Turtles in Time so much more, but Hyperstone Heist is still a great game. You can't go wrong if you're looking to play a fun, especially couch co-op beat 'em up. It's definitely worth the time.
For the longest time, I knew the titles were different, but playing them, I'm like, it's the same game. Because I know at some point they kind of deviate. The Genesis version deviates and goes on its own. But yeah, it's a tough call because they both played really good. And being that Hyperstone Heist was like the first Turtles game to arrive on the Sega system, we took it and loved it.
Yeah, could have done a heck of a lot worse.
That's for sure.
But no, so Turtles in Time though, I have to get the nod for it because it was based off the arcade, so we got to go with that one.
Yeah, I think Turtles in Time gets a slight edge, but it's still very close. I mean, you're going to have a good time either way. Mortal Kombat 1. Go ahead,
oh,
Brian.
Goodness. I want you guys to keep in mind, we haven't said this the entire time, and now we're doing the direct comparison. I had a Genesis as a kid. I wasn't just a Nintendo fanboy, but I got a Genesis later on in the life cycle, and I got it only to buy the games that I couldn't get for the Super Nintendo. So when I was a kid, my Mortal Kombat was the Super Nintendo version. I didn't get the Genesis when I played that at friends' houses. The fact that you had the code to get the blood for the Genesis makes it the game to play. Does it look better than the Super Nintendo version? No.
Definitely not.
Play better than the Super Nintendo version? No, but it's not a bad play, so I'm not going to go ahead and critique it for that. Does it sound better than the Super Nintendo version? No. Oh dear God, does it sound poor. But the fact that you could unlock the actual fatality and that you could unlock the blood, that made it the version to play. Even I can't, in my Nintendo fanboy, headspace, defend the Nintendo version for saying, yeah, we're just going to have sweat. That was just a stupid decision.
It completely defeats the purpose of the game.
Yes.
Like, that was the whole marketing behind the game. Everybody wanted that game. It's like, and Nintendo had a problem at that time already where people, Genesis had this whole, we're going to get into ad campaigns in just a few minutes. All this ad campaigns for, they basically made Nintendo look like the baby system the entire time. And then they go and they make that decision. Y'all ain't helping yourself over there. This is not a good move.
Now, if there's a company out there that knows how to shoot themselves in the foot, it's Nintendo.
But, Mortal Kombat looked really nice on the Super Nintendo. It sounded great on the Super Nintendo.
It had a better controller, that's for damn sure, for a fighting game.
I kind of like that 6-button controller, though. I really did.
It's not bad.
Was the 6-button around when the first Mortal Kombat came out?
I think by then it would have been. Because I think it was a little bit after Street Fighter came out and everybody wanted to kill themselves with the 3 buttons.
Having to press the start button to switch between kicks and punches.
Yeah.
Oh, goodness.
Horrible. Anyway, I don't know. There's advantages and disadvantages to each. Tasmania. Big back in the day. Big back in the day during this period of time.
Yes.
Two completely different games.
Completely different.
Not even in the same world, these two games.
Genesis 1 being the better of the two.
Sure, because it was an action platformer as opposed to Outrun, which is what the Super Nintendo was.
When we talked about this ahead of time, I had to go back and see it. I had to see what the hell you guys were. I could not believe that that was a game that they released back then. It's like a mobile game that they would release today. It's like an endless runner, is what it would look like.
Yeah.
Who wanted that?
It's literally a camera shot from Taz's back as he's running away from you.
To what end? Just to run? Did you ever watch the cartoon and were like, man, I just want to see him run? Nope.
He didn't do his spin, like nothing. Like the Genesis one was a side-scroller platform game, and it looked fantastic. It looked like it was ripped right out of the cartoon.
Well, the Super Nintendo one didn't look bad. It just played horribly.
That's true. Tasmania, Genesis, very good game. Highly recommend you go get that. Again, it's probably not very expensive at all. I can't imagine that game's more than $30. Here we are, guys. The marketing of the Genesis versus the Super Nintendo. I will say it that way because Genesis was way more aggressive about things. I put a series of commercials in our shared doc for you guys to check out. I went through a bunch of commercials on YouTube just for like a reference to go back and refresh my memory. And Genesis, Sega, they were definitely the aggressors in that situation. There was a couple of commercials where Nintendo calls them out by name, but it's very rare. Usually they say things like our competitors or something like that, being much more buttoned up and professional, where Genesis was like, they suck! They're for babies, basically, right? They didn't actually say that, but that was the point that they were trying to get across.
Decide to step up to this kind of power, this kind of challenge, this kind of flying, crashing, feeling. When you decide to get serious, there's only one place to come, the games of Super Nintendo. No one else creates this kind of experience, because no one else creates these kinds of games. Now you're playing with power, superpower.
Well, the biggest advertising commercial that I remember vividly was the whole Genesis does what Nintendo don't. That was like all over the place.
Yeah, they started that advertising campaign back when the NES was out to go ahead and show, hey, we got 16 bits and this company's only working with 8 bits over here.
Genesis does 16-bit arcade graphics. You can't do this on Nintendo. Genesis does 16-bit arcade action. You can't do this on Nintendo. Genesis does. Genesis does. Genesis does. Genesis does. Genesis does. 16-bit arcade hits. You can't do this on Nintendo. Genesis does. What Nintendo don't. The 16-bit Genesis system by Sega. Genesis does it all.
And then when they came out with the Welcome to the Next Level, which was the two 16-bit going head-to-head, they kept that aggressive tone. And I'm sorry, as a kid growing up in the 90s, the Genesis commercials were fantastic because those things were just, they were so entertaining. They were funny. They were edgy for the time. Like it was such a time capsule of what the 90s was.
I highly recommend you guys go back and watch those commercials. I'll probably embed one or two of them in here. They're awesome. They're fantastic, man. You know, there's like they'll make fun of Mario Kart in one. It was like tied to like the back of a truck. That was like the Nintendo. Genesis does what Nintendo don't.
Blast processing.
Blast processing. I think that was what it was. That's right. That's right.
The Sega Genesis has blast processing. Super Nintendo doesn't. So what's blast processing do? What if you don't have blast processing?
Or or the commercial where the salesman is trying to pitch the Super Nintendo and the camera is supposed to be the kid and it keeps panning back over to the Genesis. The guy's like, no, don't look at that. Look at this one. He's like, no, but I want Sonic.
Yeah, I want Sonic. Oh, it's so fast. And
right. And they talk about the price. They're like, oh, and it's cheaper.
And it's cheaper.
Yeah.
Gotta go. Hey, guy, you're the first serious gamer I've seen all morning. Check this out. Brand new 16-bit Super Nintendo with Super Mario World. Wow!
What's this one?
Oh, this is a Sonic the Hedgehog from Sega Genesis. Hey, look at these radical colors, huh?
Wow, Sonic's fast, too.
No, over here.
I like Genesis, and it costs a lot less.
Wait, kid, that game
I'll
there.
take Sonic and Genesis.
I knew that.
Sonic the Hedgehog. More action, more speed. Sega Genesis, it's a whole lot more for less.
There was that one time that Super Nintendo went ahead and did the commercial when they came out with Mario All-Stars, saying, hey, we have this as a pack-in now, so you buy a Super Nintendo and you get 4 games for free. You buy Genesis and you get none for free. Which one should you buy? So they started to play back, but not very much. Genesis was definitely the aggressor.
Okay, class, pop quiz. Question number 1. You want to buy a video game system. Super NES gives you 4 free games. Sega gives you no free games. Which do you choose? Number 2. Farmer Brown has 4 chickens to trade for a video game system. Super NES gives him 4 free games. Sega, no free games. Which should Farmer Brown choose? Number 3.
Buy any Super NES system and for $3.50 postage, we'll send you Super Mario All-Stars. That's 4 games free. Now, who would miss an offer like that?
Could you repeat the question?
Yeah, without a doubt. Sega was like really aggressive with their marketing. I wish Nintendo was a little bit more aggressive, because I would have liked to see like some Nintendo commercials to see what they would have came up with.
Yeah, that would have been cool.
When they finally started doing the whole Play It Loud series was when they started getting not necessarily aggressive. They didn't get aggressive, but they got more edgy.
Yeah.
Yep.
Edgy Nintendo.
That's perfect with the quotes. That's literally what they did. The guy who was he's in a diner and he explodes because he's eating as much as Yoshi does. Like they came up with some creative things, but they never like attacked Genesis. I know it's the wrong console, but there was a Sega commercial trying to promote Game Gear, and the kid's like, oh, look, it's in color. My Game Boy's not in color. And he picks up like a stick and beats himself over the head with it. And then all of a sudden he starts seeing all these things in front of him, and then he puts his Game Boy in front of his face and goes, ooh, color now. Like, they were so mean. And it was all Tom Kalinske, the CEO for Sega America at the time, that was behind all that stuff. He was a genius when it came to those sort of things.
Oh yeah, man. He was the whole arm behind them doing so well in America that they went from, Nintendo had like something like a 90% marketing share or something like that, or market share, to like totally eating up like 40-50% of that. Like they took a huge market share away from Nintendo. Obviously that didn't last for very long, but it it was extremely effective at the time. And if Sega of Japan had let, Kalinske continue doing what he was doing, at least in America, they probably would have done much better than, telling him what to do. And obviously worked real good when Saturn rolled around and the 32X and all that crap.
Even being the Nintendo fanboy that I am, I would love to live in the timeline where Kalinske could have done what he wanted to with Sega, because I think it would have led to some great competition between them for years to come.
Yeah, man. And then eventually they die out and then Nintendo screws over Sony, and then we get the PlayStation now. They have a whole new competitor that they created themselves. Way to go.
Well, what's funny about that is Sega did the same thing with the chip that allowed the Super Nintendo to create Donkey Kong Country. They came to them first, and Sega of Japan said, no, we don't want to use that tech. And Kalinske was the one that said, why don't you go and talk to the Nintendo people? Maybe they'll do it.
Wow.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Man, that's crazy.
Yeah, I saw that in the Console Wars documentary.
Well, Kutaragi, who, was over in PlayStation, he was going to, he wanted the PlayStation to be its own thing anyway. So it just took a long time for him to, be able to follow through with all that. It took him forever because they didn't fully believe in it until obviously once the PlayStation 1 came out, they fully believed in it after a few months, but it was really hard for him to get people behind him in the company. That's why they had to reach out to those other ones. And then Nintendo was like, oh, we'll screw you over. He was like, man, What?
No,
Oh,
you figured
God.
Nintendo went to what they did. Had Toshiba and Sony both make CD platforms for the Super Nintendo because Sega already had their Sega CD coming out.
Philips. It was Philips.
Was it Philips?
It was Philips.
Yep. That's how
why
the
we got the
CDI
CDI.
games like Hotel
Okay,
Mario and
okay.
stuff came out.
Okay, because I wasn't sure if it was Philips or if it was Toshiba. Okay, that's right for the CDI, and that allowed them to use. Yeah. Okay.
Those beautiful Zelda games we got.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I highly encourage everybody to go back and watch some of those commercials. They're very entertaining. You know, they're interesting. Sega had the better commercials for sure, but Nintendo had a great library. There was nothing to shy away from when you got games like Contra 3, Castlevania 4, Super Mario, Super Metroid. Come on.
Sega Genesis did a great job with the commercials, but Nintendo had one thing that they did not, and that was Paul Rudd.
Paul, yes. And that one commercial, dude, he's like, what is he, like 17 years old in that commercial? It's crazy.
He looks just like he does now.
He does. It's so weird. It's so weird. He's got a baby face.
Yeah, you guys definitely have to go check out those commercials. They're definitely worth watching.
Yeah, his hair's like blowing back. He's like, oh. Let's move on to some accessories and add-ons for the SNES. Where do you guys want to begin with these? There's about 5 or 6 here we have posted. There's not a ton of these that are super important. Some stuff we can touch on. Where do you guys want to begin?
Well, the Super Game Boy was really important.
Yes, that was pretty cool.
Because it was a cartridge that plugged in your Super Nintendo and allowed you to play your Game Boy cartridges on the TV through your Super Nintendo. That was genius. That was genius.
Yeah, in color, like Brian just mentioned. There was a color palette that you can like basically, it was like kind of like a layover, I guess, that would like change. How did it work, Brian? You seem to know more about this stuff than I would. It changed it, but it was not through the cartridge, so it was just like something that modified it.
Yeah, it used the same technology that the Game Boy Color did. So like if you put one of your Game Boy carts into the Game Boy Color, it had a 4 color palette that it would just randomly assign, but you could choose it to have just a different base color. So you could go ahead and choose blue or red or green, and it would go ahead and pick the 4 colors for that one in particular. There were some Game Boy carts that were actually made specifically for the Super Game Boy, or at least made to work specifically with the Super Game Boy, where it would have its own border. The one that I always remember is Donkey Kong. Was it 94? I think 94 is when the Donkey Kong came out on the Game Boy.
Yeah,
the one that started with the original. Yeah, the one that started with the arcade stages and moved on further. But it had its own border that looked like a Donkey Kong arcade cabinet, and it had its own color palette. So even though it was only a Game Boy game, it had a color palette just like a Game Boy Color game would have. And so, yeah, it was amazing that you could play these games that were portable on your big screen, but it also increased the Super Nintendo's library. Now you had access to all of these Game Boy games. So the thing that they were fighting with Sega about all the time, not having a lot of games in their library, now they just, added hundreds to it because there were so many darn Game Boy game packs.
There was also the Game Genie, which was on a variety of consoles at that time. So that was like a pretty common thing. I used one for a little while. They're fine. They're interesting little things.
They let you cheat.
They let you cheat. You put a code in on a certain game and it cracked it so you can never die, unlimited ammo, all that good stuff.
Yeah, there was no game FAQs at the time, so it was the only way you were going to get cheats unless you subscribed to like Nintendo Power or one of the other gaming magazines.
Yep, that's true. We got the stupid Super Scope.
that was not a Freudian slip. That was intentional, damn it. The Super Scope looked cool, okay? It was a dumb peripheral. It was gigantic. It takes up way too much space. I own one. It's sitting in my closet right now.
Brian, I thought that thing was so badass. I'll give you that. I was like, oh, that thing is so cool. It didn't do like, other than Super Scope, did it have any other games that it was even compatible with? What did the thing do outside of Super Scope?
There was Yoshi's Safari, where you were Mario riding the back of Yoshi carrying a gun. How crazy is that?
That's nuts.
shooting characters in the Mushroom Kingdom. But my favorite in the series was Battle Clash. And basically you were in a mech. You never saw your mech, but you were in a mech and you fought other people in mechs. And so literally it was a rail shooter. So
That sounds cool.
the other mech would be moving back and forth. You would try to find what vulnerable points it had. You would shoot it. You would shoot the laser shots that were coming at you. That was the way that you defended yourself. And it had a storyline. Like the characters in the mechs would talk to you as you were going through, and your goal was to get to the big boss mech at the end. And it was a lot of fun. I got a lot of gameplay out of that one. It had a sequel too called Metal Clash. I own it, and I've played it once or twice, but I've never really gotten into it. I preferred the original one.
That sequel, I would assume, is on SNES also.
Yeah. Also compatible with the Super Scope.
Was there any other Super Scope games, or was that literally it? Because I know there wasn't many at all.
There's one or two others that are compatible with it. Those are the only ones that I played on the regular.
Okay.
So yeah,
what worth the investment of buying whatever that what was that gun, probably like $150 or something like that?
I don't think it was that expensive. I mean, it was probably like $60 like a regular game was.
Okay.
And the Super Scope 6 did come with, what was it, 4 games? No, it must have been 6 games. That's why they called it that.
Sure.
It came with a variety of games for you to play.
Messed up if they're like Super Scope 6. Here's 3 games
with 4 games. It had a Tetris-like game in it. There was a Missile Command game.
Wait, what? Whoa! A Tetris-like game was inside that thing?
Yeah, there was the blocks would drop down. You'd shoot the block and it would rotate, and the colors were on each side of the block, so you had to try to make the colors match by the time it landed.
It would have been cool if you like shoot off pieces and make it like a different shape. Like that would have been cool.
There was a version of that, but that one didn't play like Tetris. Those blocks went horizontally across the screen. That was one of them. But there was a whack-a-mole on it, but it was like with these little purple aliens that would pop out and you'd have to shoot them, and it was worthwhile. Like I played that Super Scope 6 quite a bit.
Okay. All right. Oh, look, I'm gonna take your word for it. One day I'll get a Super Scope, and we'll see.
Super Scope and about 1 million AA batteries and
they
a
take
CRT
AA batteries. What?
I'm pretty sure it was AA.
Oh, man.
I haven't used mine in a long time, and of course I take the batteries out when I store it, so I don't recall.
So it's wireless? It doesn't even like have a cable to go to the system?
No. You have sensors that you hook up on the system.
Not the sensors, not the power glove, not the power glove.
One on the corner and one on the side. It was insanely accurate for the time. Like it really was. You put those sensors up, and it worked really well. But it's an absolute pain to set up nowadays.
Yeah, that's why I never use the power glove. It's sitting over here on a shelf. Oh no, wait, I took it down, but it was sitting over here on a shelf. Like, what the hell am I going to do with that thing? You just look at the sensors, just like wrapping them around the CRT. Like, what? Come on, man.
Yeah, it's crazy. So yeah, I get it. You can make fun of the Super Scope all you want to. It deserves it. But I still had a lot of fun with it. And man, I was a kid that got to carry a bazooka.
I mean, dude, I did think it was insanely cool. I will 100% admit that I thought it was insanely cool. Like, what a badass thing. Come on, man.
I liked it better than
Arnold Schwarzenegger with a bazooka, or like Rambo with a bazooka. Like, come on, that was what they were doing. Very cool. Mouse for Mario Paint. It's what everybody wants when you were a kid.
It was a mouse.
Get me a mouse. And Mario Paint.
Did either of you own Mario Paint when you were a kid?
No.
I played it at my cousin's house, but I never owned it.
Best time killer ever. You could spend so much time. Now, if you had a computer at the time, which you got to keep in mind, Super Nintendo came out in 91, so home computers were not all that common. If you had MS Paint, you were good. You didn't need Mario Paint.
Yeah.
But if you didn't, oh my goodness, the amount of time that you could kill on this thing. Because you could paint, you could do music. There was what they called a coffee break, which was a fly swatter type game. You could do animations with it. You could create stamps. There's literally an entire strategy guide that is literally just showing you how to make stamps, to make Street Fighter characters, to make all the Mario characters. And you could literally create your own scenarios. Like when you're a kid, there's nothing cooler than making your own version of a video game. So it was a great time sink.
Brian, you underestimate how little artistic talent I have. You underestimate that completely, sir.
But you don't need any, because the stamps, you're just following a guide and going, okay, blue goes here, red goes here, yellow goes here.
Do you remember what we talked about earlier when I said the swords were more fun?
Okay, so the Super Scope is a better sell for you than the mouse. I totally get it.
100% would have been. I'm not. Look, I did play Mario Paint once at my cousin's house. It was I like the music. The music was kind of cool, but I was not the child to be entertained by that. I think it's a cool idea. I think my sister would have loved it. She was like very into art. She got 100% of the art talent in the family. Like I don't know what happened. We were born 5 years apart. She is very good at art. I can barely write my name, so I don't understand anything about art at all.
Maybe if you had Mario Paint.
Maybe. Wes, did you play Mario Paint?
I dabbled with it once or twice, but no. I mean, it was a cool concept. You know, it was designed for kids. It was something to suck the little kids in. Oh, look, you can color. You can color your favorite characters.
He's telling you to give us the swords, Brian. Give us the swords.
So I already talked about the Super Scope. I don't know what you want from me.
Let's talk about something we can all agree on. Super Nintendo's controller is one of the greatest controllers of all time.
Really
arguably
is.
by many, to be the greatest. I don't know. I really have to give it a lot of thought. It is easily top 5 controller. Easily. Like, no, not even a question. The comfortability, the dog bone shape. When they made the dog bone controller in the in the NES, I couldn't believe that didn't exist before then. Like, why the hell was it square? Did you guys hold this thing more than an hour? Why is your controller a rectangle? I'm sorry. Go ahead. I'll let you guys take it over.
No, you're fine because that's incredibly valid. The fact that we have shoulder buttons for the very first time was an amazing thing.
Yep.
Who knew that would like revolutionize the controller schema? Because we've seen that in every controller ever since.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, no controller has come out after that point that I can think of that doesn't have shoulder buttons. But
the Jaguar, I'm sure that piece of junk did not have shoulder buttons. No. I think it had such a weird controller. Wes, you have a Jaguar?
I do. I'm looking at the. Nah, you know what? I don't think it does. It had.
sure it does.
Yeah, no, I don't think it does.
And then even the face buttons, the fact that they were two of the buttons were concave, the other two were convex.
Mm-hmm.
You didn't have to look down; you could just feel where your fingers were. It was such a beautiful design, and it was built to last.
Why does nobody do this?
I can't speak to that. I don't know why they don't.
Even Nintendo doesn't do it. They're all shaped the same. Xbox all shaped the same. PlayStation all shaped the same. Why?
Nintendo doesn't even do a D-pad anymore. So.
Oh my god! Don't even. Let's have 4 stupid buttons and 4 different angles, and you got to go buy a third-party Joy-Con just so it works right.
I have so many controllers for my Switch; it's not even funny. The design of the Super Nintendo controller, it's inspired. It really is. You could tell that they did their homework when they created that. But the durability of it is what baffles me. It is so long-lasting. I still have a Super Nintendo controller, not from my childhood, but it's a Super Nintendo controller that a friend of mine had that I was able to acquire later in life that still works beautifully. And my brother used to beat the crap out of controllers. That's what he took his frustration at when he was having a hard time with a game. And yeah, I think he might have busted one of them, but for the most part, they took that lashing. And I have no idea how, because it's just a simple little piece of plastic. But those controllers are just fantastic. Love them.
Better than the Genesis ones. I broke a bunch of Genesis controllers, man. A bunch of them. The D-pads would go out.
I know I've said this before, but why in the world does every single Sega Genesis controller have a little BB pellet inside of it? You know what I'm saying? Like, if you pick up a Genesis controller and do this, I guarantee you won't find one that doesn't do the little tick, 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 tick.
Yeah.
When you shake it. It's insane.
Something broke off in it. You dropped it one time on a hard floor and that was it. Something
broke off. I think they dropped the pallet at the warehouse because they all do it.
Yeah, I mean, to Wes's point earlier, the 6-button Genesis controller is pretty good.
It is.
You know, I don't understand why people don't do the concave and convex thing anymore. I think that's insane. It would help people tremendously. Not that I think their thinking is probably like, listen, everybody's figured this out. You know where the buttons are. You're going to be just fine. But it would just be nice to have, you know? Can we have nice things anymore?
No.
That's right. So Super Nintendo controller is absolutely awesome. You guys should check that out. All right, everybody, for our final segment, Every month we do a pulse check. If you don't know what this is, we just talk about a couple of games. Basically taking a look at the market, the snapshot view, right? We're just looking at a handful of games for the Super Nintendo, kind of see where the market is at. These are titles that we each picked one. This month, Wes has the low pick. I have the high pick. We alternate that every single month. And then Brian has something right in the middle. So we're going to start out with Wes this month. Wes, what do you got for us for the SNES?
Ooh, my low pick was Super Star Wars for Super Nintendo. Awesome game. I remember when it first came out, the music was good, had the John Williams soundtrack to it. Very hard though.
Mm-hmm.
Very, very hard.
Really difficult.
It was a side-scrolling action game based off the movie. They did all three. They did Super Empire and they did Jedi, and but we're gonna go with just the first one, Super Star Wars. So if you want just a cartridge, it's only going to cost you $13, which is dirt cheap.
Mm-hmm.
A complete in box is going to be $33, and a sealed copy is only $127 for a Super Nintendo game. Sealed, that's dirt cheap.
Yeah, it is.
There must have been like a pallet of these that were found or something, or multiple pallets, like a warehouse full of these that are sealed for it to be 120. Like that's insane. Like most complete in box copies go for over like $100 on Super Nintendo, just because the cardboard is harder to find. People threw it away. $137 for a sealed one is nuts, or $127 for a sealed one is insane.
But even still, a complete in box only going to cost you $33.
I don't know why I have a cart. I have a cart only. I have no idea why. I'm like baffled by this. I'm so mad that I only have a cart right now.
All right, it's cheap. You need to go out and find a complete in box one somewhere.
Oh yeah, man. Well,
really do.
SoCal Gaming Expo will be here in a few months. I might seek that out for $33. I might go seek that out for sure.
Okay.
Save up before you do. I mean.
So that was a low pick. Awesome game. Definitely a great choice, Wes. Brian, you got kind of our mid pick here. I would say it's still kind of on the higher end a bit, for sure.
It's still pricey, but my pick is the Castlevania game Dracula X. Very, very underrated for the console. People have a tendency to focus on Super Castlevania 4, which is a great game. But considering we didn't get Rondo of Blood here in the States, Dracula X it's a fantastic game. True to form Castlevania. The straight up action form, not the Metroidvania type games, but just a great game where you go through the different baddies and just hack and slash, and fun time had by all. A cart only of this, to your point, Matt, still a little expensive, about $256.
Yeah.
You want to go ahead and get yourself a complete in box, it's going to run you over $1,000. It's $1,098. If you'd like a sealed copy, a little too rich for my blood, but it's $3,514.
Nah, y'all sealed collectors are crazy. You people collecting sealed games out there are wild.
That is a story for a different day, because I could go on and on for hours about sealed collectors.
I have sealed games, but it's just because I bought them and I just never got around to playing them, and they're sealed.
You and me both.
But at this point, I know how much they're worth. I'm not going to open them. If anything, I would just go buy a cartridge or something and just play the damn cartridge. Like, why the hell would I open it up, if I have a sealed copy and it's worth that much money?
You just explained why I'm not a sealed collector.
Yeah. I don't want to buy a sealed game. I wouldn't go out of my way to buy them. Absolutely not. But if I have them, great. And if they're actually worth something, I'm not going to open them. I'm just going to go buy it again. Like, dude, I'll buy a digital copy when they're on sale for like $5. Get out of here.
But even still, a complete in box for Dracula X, almost $1,100.
Yeah, dude.
What?
Is that insane?
Expensive cardboard you got there.
Oh my goodness.
Because they threw it out. There's not a lot of them around.
It's true. Everybody threw that stuff out. I mean, the NES, I'm guilty of that. But it wasn't my system either. It was my sister's system. So she's guilty of it. And then I got some games for it. I'm guilty of throwing those away because, I mean, you're stupid. You're little. You're just like, oh, I just want to play Ninja Gaiden. I don't need this. Mistakes were made.
But, I mean, $1,100 we think is pricey. That's still not the high pick.
Nope. No, it is not.
So the high pick here is Hagane, and it's one of the hardest to find SNES games. This was a rental exclusive, from what I understand. I do have a copy of this. I have a loose copy with a rental sticker on there. I do not have a complete in box. I do not have a sealed copy. The loose is $946. A complete is $2,665. And if by some chance you've figured out how to get a sealed copy, $6,308. Super expensive. If you look at the SNES charts, the only things more expensive than this is I think I mentioned like a Donkey Kong version that was played in the Blockbuster at some point. There's like 3 or 4 games that are listed on price charting that are higher than this, but they're like, stuff you're not going to find. Like Hagane you can find if you go to a convention. That Donkey Kong, trial card or whatever the hell it was, like you're not going to see that every day.
Once in a blue moon.
Yeah. So Hagane is a very expensive game. It's I forget who made it. Oh my god, I'm gonna forget. I think Hudson. I want to say Hudson made it. Which they made like the PC Engine games and all that stuff. Eventually Konami bought it, so Konami would have that license now. So if it gets re-released, it'll be through Konami because they own Hudson. So that would be interesting to see. I could see them re-releasing that. These companies like limited run games, they're going back and they're trying to get games that are harder to find and re-releasing them, which I think is great. That's pretty cool that they're doing that, especially for getting an official re-release of some of the harder to find titles is awesome. But Hagane is, I don't know. I mean, like a lot of people don't even know about it, so I can't imagine that would happen. But stranger things have happened. Who knows?
True.
So that's what you're looking at.
That's just crazy. Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
That's like 2600. That's more expensive than Panzer Dragoon Saga for the Saturn.
It is, but the cardboard, man, like this, like I said, I'm almost positive this game was a rental exclusive, and to the point that Brian brought up earlier, dude, they just threw away all the boxes. Like, how many of those places actually kept the box to Hagane? Like, not many. I have seen them; they exist, but they're pretty rare. All right, guys, so that wraps up the show for us today. This has been the SNES Special Edition with Brian. Thank you, Brian, again for joining us. We appreciate you.
Thanks, Brian. It was great having you.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate the invite and having a chance to talk about one of my favorite consoles.
Now, Brian, if you guys didn't know Brian, he also does stuff on his own. It's Mora Brothers. Is that how you say it?
Yeah, Mora Bros, Mora Brothers. It's the same.
Okay, so he has his own content out there. I'm going to let him talk about that in a second. But on Nerdthusiast, if you go to nerdthusiast.com, which is our blog, you'll see his writings on there covering retro Nintendo stuff. Brian, what else can people learn about you if they want to check out your content?
Well, if you go to any of our Nerdthusiast social media, I do a lot of content for there, both on Instagram, on X, on Blue Sky, you name it. It's going to be there. And as Matt had mentioned, I do have my own social media accounts. I'm Mora Bros everywhere, so it's MOURA BROS. And basically, I do thematic content for Nintendo consoles. So in the month of February, for example, we would be doing 64 February. And so the majority of the stuff I post would be based on the Nintendo 64. And I try to keep that theme going throughout the entire month, just showing stuff in my collection and just things that I love about Nintendo and growing up a Nintendo fanboy. So if you're interested, check it out. Give us a follow. Give us a like. Go ahead and enjoy the content and give us some feedback too.
Awesome. Wes, what about you, sir? Where can people find you at?
You can catch me on Instagram at Grendel5XPX.
Matt, you guys can follow me at FromNJ2CA. The 2 is the number 2 over on Twitter or X or whatever they're going to call it next month. Check out our other podcasts and shows. We have a poker podcast that goes up every month. If you just go to nerdthusiast.com, you'll see all the kind of content that we cover. In addition to that, if you guys like what you heard today, please consider giving us a 5-star review over on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. And if you really enjoyed what you heard and you want to help us out, you can support us financially. Nerdthusiast.com. I'm sorry, that's totally wrong. Patreon.com/nerdthusiast. You guys can support us for as little as $1 a month over there. And we do truly appreciate it. It helps us out tremendously. So yeah, that's about it. Until next time, you guys take care.
Have a good one, guys.